So you're asking about chivalry. Well, in the first place, it arose because there was a reflection. When we embraced the green trace, you discovered that this idea of athletics entering the arena of human experience represented that we were now sublimating the war impulse and the uncontrolled sexual impulse and the application of those energies to create new terms of engagement where we could actually compete and inspire each other in the competition. But now it wasn't about who is going to kill who, it was about who is going to promote and how are we going together to promote the best in each other. And if one of us, if it's a running competition, excelled and reached the finish line first, great. But then we were all better off because of the creative tension that we produced between us. And that this was one of the first expressions of the shift from the sublimation of the rivalrous impulse into the chivalrous impulse. And then how those behaviors got expressed, certainly in the times that the ideas of knighthood and the Arthurian legend emerged. And you're just leaving the UK, so you are in the vicinity of some of those lines of legend. But how those people, they celebrated the virtues of character. And when you embrace into it the idea of the Holy Grail, which we touched on in a different context in the yellow influence with the idea of the silver chalice, how those character features and virtues and behaviors became, I'm going to use here a specific name, the biological cover, the behavioral cover, the code of conduct cover to protect something that was believed to be sacred. So the idea that to hold on to the sacred and the most special in the deepest, most embodied way, there will be layers of behavior and courtesies and honors and respect. Very much like you will look at a fruit and it will have its inner part that will give life to the next generation in the middle. And this idea that everything precious is protected and has another layer of cover and another layer of cover and another layer of cover. Same is true in the sense of human experience. We have our houses, and we inside of our houses we have the safe inside of which we keep something precious. And in a similar way, we've developed throughout the ages this idea of an inner sanctum, or the inner of all sanctums, where we place the most sacred thing. And what was it that was to protect all those layers? You'd find often the behavior of and the code of conduct of chivalry. And that actually permeates all cultures in different ways, different expressions in the East and the West. But we asked, does it have any place in the current postmodern, post-everything, post-truth even time? And if yes, in what way? And how can it become current, or how can you contemporize these ideas? Because we live in a time where we have sacrificed the sacred in the name of ultimate scientific knowledge, even though when you look at people like Einstein and others that were deeply inspired by him, when they reached the deepest point of their inquiry, they were often ready to embrace something more invisible, and not just invisible, but metaphysical, hence the never-ending search for the unified field of one kind or another. So it became a very potent and special inquiry, and led to one of the technologies we use now in these Zoom events is, so if you have 200 people around, developing a conversation in the middle with 4 or 5 or 6 people, it's a bit like the fishbowl or the Samoan circle technology on Zoom. I never knew it can work, but it works amazingly. It's once again discovering technologies of dialogue live in the search, more by trial and error than by some kind of a premeditated knowledge. So, and I say that because even in that circumstance, there are codes of conduct that are somewhat chivalrous, or else a large, we call them Zoom protocols. But how do you bring a large group together and create a productive and interesting and provocative and challenging and thrilling and exhilarating, all at the same time kind of an experience? It needs some ways and means and codes of conduct. So all those were part of the inquiry, and first one line in the inquiry is search for the place of chivalrous behavior in the past. Second line in the inquiry is, so how were those relevant, if they are to be made relevant for today, how would you approach them? A third line of research, specifically, how does it relate to the individual life and this sense of one's own honor and one's own intactness, where a person makes a decision to not do certain things, even when no one is seeing, because you could, in modern life, get by with all sorts of things. And this is not by anybody trying to pretend to be more holier than thou, or some kind of a sanctified life, not at all. But the intention, the endeavor to say there are certain things I will not do, even when no one is watching, because if I did, I lower my own standards between me and I lose in my own energy field, if you like, in my own sense of who I am and what I'm about, some element of the intactness of what I'm about. And so that led to an inquiry, fourth line of inquiry, around the research into cover and cover technologies and cover practices and self-cover. Covering that to mean the imagery that goes with it is the farmer that gets up in the morning and walk the perimeters of the farm to make sure that they covered in their eyes and in their senses everything in their farm that needs attention. Has that quality of care. And then it brought into it the question about arts and how art comes into that. And we left it mid-flight because one of the practices we're using is we're not trying to give on anything a complete answer or a final rendering. And the discipline that goes with it is don't exhaust the potential of an inquiry. Do enough with it to get it spinning so that others are encouraged to take it up and explore it, rather than look to have final answers. Because the inquiry is more important than the answer.
Yes, the inquiry. Not exhausting the inquiry. I came across a book title recently, Bottoming Out the Universe. The futile attempt to get to the bottom of it. And the theory of everything, for instance, could be such an attempt. And when we start to intuit the more than human or metaphysical or causing dimensions of being, perhaps it is in fact bottomless. So a good inquiry, and each of these questions feels like a great inquiry, perhaps cannot be exhausted. Although maybe in a given session we can become exhausted and sort of lose energy for continuing. So I'm just following this thought. There's a practice, and it's a chivalrous practice in making sure the space continues to feel open so that people can carry the inquiry with them into the rest of life. And there's one of the inquiries here that really spoke to me, and it's the example I want to offer is a little bit edgy and extremely relevant for these times. So I'm going to just go there. I'm going to skate to the edge, if it's all right.
Yeah, so but just before you go there, to still stay with the last thing you said.
Yes.
So actually the assignment or the invitation or the tasking or the exercise this weekend was not to answer the question, but was to develop a starter brief how to approach the question and the inquiry. And somebody said to me, what is a starter brief? I said, well, if you imagine that an inquiry is a continent, the starter brief would be the brochure and the high level map of how you intend to explore the continent. And you're absolutely right, that is a chivalrous practice, because when we recognize that each of those core inquiries of life, essentially they search to come close to the ineffable realm. If we live a life that is in touch with the ineffable, we would always be courteous enough to never exhaust anything. Why would we?
We wouldn't, and we couldn't, and we won't, try as we might. I love, however, that human curiosity, maybe at a stage in development, needs the illusion of being able to exhaust, to fully flesh out the potential. And I know I can relate to that. There's something that absolutely wants to get to the bottom of things. So I want to provide an example, not because in any way is it definitive or does it even really answer the question, but it's great to have examples. At least I find them very helpful.